So I stuck it out for 2 years. But I basically ended up quitting in a pretty bad mental state. I'd been, I was crying at work. I was crying at home. I was really struggling emotionally just from being like completely exhausted. And
do you believe that the gold standard, I mean, obviously the gold standard is there to protect patients.
Yes, of course.
But do you think it destroys veterinarians? What part of it is quietly so hard?
Oh, there's a lot of parts. When I first moved onto the boat, basically for the first few years on the boat, she was just trying to sink or die the whole time. It was like, it was really bad. So it was like, I had very little sailing experience, and obviously like very little mechanic experience or anything. As it turns out, diesel engines and water pumps and refrigerators are all like kind water. Of like, well, and they're all kind of like animals.
Veterinary medicine teaches us how to save lives. What it doesn't teach us is what to do when the system itself starts taking pieces of us with it. Today's guest didn't burn out quietly. She didn't numb herself. She didn't complain in the break room. She just walked away. Dr. Sheddy did everything right. Vet school, wildlife work, international rescue, and then she realized the life she was living wasn't the one she was promised. She sold her life, moved onto a sailboat, and built a floating veterinary clinic, delivering care to animals who would never see a vet in places the profession rarely reaches. From the outside, it looks insane. From the inside, it looks honest. This conversation isn't about sailing. It's about meaning. It's about moral compromise. It's about what happens when you're doing the job correctly still feels wrong. If you ever feel trapped, invisible, replaceable, or quietly wondered, is this really it? This episode is for you. This is Irreplaceable Truths, and this is a story of a veterinarian who refused to disappear. And how's the weather in Idaho, by the way?
Surprisingly warm. I mean, it's colder than Baja, but we are not getting snow. It's like last time we were here, which was maybe 5 years ago, there was a lot of snow, knee-deep snow when we arrived, and it's green and only snow on the top of the mountains right now. So we're hoping it starts coming before Christmas, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, it's La Nina this year, and even Mammoth is hurting for snow right now. Mammoth is where it usually dumps. But yeah, all the ski resorts are not that happy. But were you there for the polar vortex at all, or did you miss that?
No, we only just got here 48 hours ago or something. So
so you missed it. You missed the polar vortex. Yeah, those are fun. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but
no.
And how far south have you gone on the boat? Have you gone down to Antarctica?
No, just basically been on the coast of Central America. So from Panama up to Mexico. Yeah.
Oh, so you haven't hit South America yet?
No, we would like to. Basically the boat was in such bad condition, we kind of had to get it to Mexico to start fixing it, and then the work kind of took off there, and we've been there ever since.
There's nothing wrong being stuck in Baja, Mexico.
No, there's worse places.
Sorry. I mean, I remember when I was working as a veterinarian, I would always think of just going down to Baja, Mexico, buying a panga, opening up a fish taco stand, and I'd go out every morning and fish. And if I caught fish, then the taco stand would be open. And if I didn't catch fish, there's no taco stand that day.
Yeah.
The things you think of as a veterinarian while you're being nailed to the ground with work and everything else. It's unbelievable. So you're known by everybody as Dr. Sheddy, right? Is that what you go by?
Yeah, generally Dr. Sheddy. It's a nickname I've had since I was a kid, so it's kind of stuck. And I've lived in a lot of places where Sheridan is particularly difficult for people to say, so Sheddy's always been an easier go-to for everybody.
Yeah, that's the same with me. My first name is Gershon, but everyone called me G. So I just put a doctor in front of it once I graduated. So
Yeah.
it was easier. Right. So you were Sheddy through vet school, and then you became Dr. Sheddy.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's awesome. And the first question I really want to just, okay, you did everything right. You went to vet school, you got a great job, you did wildlife work, you did international rescue. What was the moment that said, okay, this is not what I expected?
I think there was lots of moments, and it was like a different moment at each workplace. My first job was in a rural practice in Queensland, and I had a very old school boss. He'd owned the clinic for 40 plus years. Things were there was a real hierarchy in the clinic that was followed, where like it was head vet, head nurse, manager, and things like that, which was difficult sometimes. But also the new graduates, we just got all the hours. So I was working 8 till 6 Monday to Friday, 8 till 12 Saturday, 8 till 12 Sunday, almost or every week. Sometimes I'd get Sundays off, but it was easily a 50-hour work week, often 60. And then I was on call most weekends and like 2 or 3 weeknights. So I got burnt out really, really quickly. And in Australia, we graduate when we're 22. So I finished high school when I was 17, was in university before I was even 18, and then graduated at 22 and found myself like in the workforce and just was very under-equipped, I guess, to know how to ask for what I wanted, how to ask for boundaries. At that time, there was a vet shortage too, so there wasn't a lot of jobs, and so there wasn't really the option to leave my workplace. So I stuck it out for 2 years, but I basically ended up quitting in a pretty bad mental state. I'd been, I was crying at work, I was crying at home, I was really struggling emotionally just from being like completely exhausted. And so I kind of left that place because I knew there was no other option to continue my career there. And I knew I was at that point where either I was going to stop being a vet or I needed to stop working there. So I left there and started working at a clinic that was basically 50% wildlife and 50% small animal. And I did really love that job because I always wanted to be a wildlife and exotic vet. So it was very much like my dream job. But what I then found, so kind of the first clinic, it was burnout, that I was like, all right, I can't do that anymore. I can't work these long hours. I can't be this superhero. I need to find something else. And then at the hospital where I was working I was basically put into the head wildlife vet position. So I was like 24, which was a lot of pressure, being kind of the only veterinarian at the wildlife clinic. But then I was also working in a gold standard small animal clinic. And what was really difficult was I would go from the wildlife hospital and we would get, say, a koala that was hit by a car. It had broken femur, broken radius. I would take it to surgery. We'd plate it. We'd do, like $5,000 worth of, well, probably now it'd be more like $10,000 worth of operations on the koala, rehabilitate it, all this stuff and release it. Then I would get to the small animal clinic and a puppy would come in that had been hit by a car with a broken femur and the owners wouldn't have any money. And then I would euthanize the puppy. And it was just really difficult going between the two environments, sometimes even in the same day. I would go from one clinic to the other. It just really made it hit home that the financial constraints of some owners was really, making me question, I guess, that moral injury we talk about, where I didn't want to euthanize the puppy. I could save the puppy. I had the resources and the tools to save the puppy, but the owners didn't have the resources to pay for the treatment. And yet at the koala hospital, where my patients weren't paying me at all, I was able to do all of these things. And so it was just, I found that really difficult. And so I decided at that moment, I'm only going to do charity work. I no longer want to be placed in these positions and these ethical dilemmas where I'm making decisions based on money. So I then worked for a charity, also very amazing. I was working for Animals Asia in China doing bear rescue. We were rescuing bears from the biofarm industry, which was amazing. But compassion fatigue was a very real thing there. We were seeing a lot of pretty extreme cases of cruelty, a lot of bears that had been very mistreated and had a lot of injuries and illnesses because of that. So that was very hard. But also living in China was just very difficult. It was quite isolating. I was trying to learn the language, but it's a very difficult Mandarin. It's very, very difficult. It's the customs are just very different. I just felt quite isolated there. So basically 2 years into that job, I'd spent 2 years essentially in each position that I'd been in, and each one kind of threw at me these different things that just didn't sit right with me. And I was like, okay, I've tried like a general practice. I've tried this more high-end gold standard practice mixed with a wildlife hospital. Now I've tried this full charity work. None of them have quite been the right fit. Perhaps I need to make my right fit, and I might not find it otherwise. And so that was kind of where the idea of starting my own veterinary outreach services began. And at that time, sailing YouTube channels were taking off. I had never been on a sailboat, like never even been on a sailboat, but it still seemed like an okay idea. So my partner at the time was kind of had sailed before and was like, yeah, let's do it. So yeah, we bought a boat and started doing it.
Oh man.
Yeah. It's a lot to
what better way to learn how to sail than have, some internet, some Wi-Fi, a little YouTube, and let's head out into the Pacific on a sailboat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There was a few people doing it. So I was like, okay, I can probably figure it out.
Oh my gosh. Sailing's very difficult, and God bless you for learning. I mean, you learned on the fly, which is kind of how veterinary medicine is too, though. If you think about it, right? It's like learning how to sail once you graduate. We were taught the tools in veterinary school. You were taught the tools by YouTube, and you just said, screw it, let's go.
Yeah.
So you sold, you sold everything, right?
Yeah.
You
sold everything.
You gave your dogs to your parents?
I was actually a vet student. So I was going to go work in China, and I gave a lecture on the bear sanctuary I was working in. And I said at the end of the lecture, oh, by the way, for me to be able to take this job that I really want, I need a new home for my dog. And one of the vet students was like, I'll take her. So it worked out very well. And she still lives with him, which is amazing. She's very old now, but she's had a very good life with him.
How many people have come up to you and say you're just running away from your problems?
I've not actually really ever had anybody say that. And I do recognize in myself that I've clearly never liked working for anybody else. And so I'm sure there's an element of that there where I am somebody who can be a little bit particular. I like things to be a certain way. And perhaps that's part of the reason why I also struggled, working in clinics and under the rules of other people and other organizations and things. But I think for the most part, like, you just are facing a new set of problems. It's not like, I think a lot of people imagine living on a sailboat, being a veterinarian, to be this dream life where I'm just sailing around in a bikini with covered in puppies or something. But, it's definitely not like that most of the time. And, like you said, but, there's a lot of sacrifices that came with it too. Like I got rid of most of my material possessions. I rehomed a dog and 3 birds, which was very hard to do. Like from an emotional standpoint, it was very hard to do. I don't get to see my family as much as I used to. I don't have the same friendship or community that some people might have when they live in one place, and, everybody lives near you and you have that kind of sense of community. It's a very different way of living. So there's a lot of new problems, I guess, that come up. So I think for the most part, you run from one, you find another kind of things.
No, I'm thinking, like, just what you just said. Like, the second you said I gave away my dog and my birds, that like hit me so hard, because there's no way I think I could ever do that. I mean, that really, it just means that's how. I mean, if I look, maybe I'm looking too deep into this, but is that truly how bad you were hurting inside?
Yeah, I think that was a big part of it. I was really ready to do something new, and I felt that Australia wasn't offering what I was looking for. So I actually rehomed the pets before I went to China, so to work with Animals Asia. And that was also when I got rid of almost all of my earthly possessions as well. So it was a big change there, which made the move to the sailboat a lot easier. But I knew I couldn't bring the pets with me, obviously, to China. They really needed me there. And I think the way I kind of justified it in myself was I knew my pets could have a good home with other owners if I picked the right people, which I was able to do, which is really great. My birds went to a friend who is a bird trainer, and she's really amazing, and they're still with her. And my dog, as I said, went to a vet student who I knew would obviously care for her and cared for animals. But to me, it felt like I was kind of, the bears really needed me, and the animal sanctuary really needed me, Animals Asia, because there's not many people who were willing to give up all of that to go and save bears in China. And so it was kind of like that feeling of, okay, my pets can be rehomed and be happy, but will this sanctuary be able to find somebody else who can do this for them? And perhaps they couldn't. And I still feel that way with what I do now. The work we do, we're servicing places and animals that truly wouldn't get vet care otherwise. There is no one who is taking a boat to a remote village that can only be accessed by boat to give these pets care. And so the sacrifices kind of feel worth it in that regard, because I knew I could give my pets what they needed with another home, but I didn't feel these other animals could perhaps get what they needed without me, leaving and going to them.
Man, that's deep. Yeah, that's still deep. And you said, a lot of people probably think, here I am in a bikini, sailing the world, puppies and kittens draped over me, like drinking a margarita.
Yeah.
What part of it is quietly so hard?
Oh, there's a lot of parts. When I first moved onto the boat, basically for the first few years on the boat, she was just trying to sink or die the whole time. It was like, it was really bad. So it was like, I had very little sailing experience, and obviously like very little mechanic experience or anything. As it turns out, diesel engines and water pumps and refrigerators are all kind of like, well, and they're all kind of like animals. Like, once you break it down and you open the parts, you're like, all right, this is like the lungs, and this is like the, the fuel systems, like the veins and the arteries. And so, I would get out these textbooks and I would sit on the floor in front of like a broken engine while my partner Jim would be trying to sail the boat and not hit anything, because we would have either no wind or too much wind, and then the engine wouldn't start and we'd be floating around aimlessly in the middle of the ocean with the engine not turning on. And I'd have this textbook out, disconnecting and reconnecting fuel pipes, priming things, reconnecting batteries and all of this stuff. And so that was a really big learning curve. And also just, it's physically difficult. The boat's swaying and rolling in the waves. You're laying down there in the dark with diesel fumes, like pouring into your face, worried that you're going to hit a rock, or, it's going to get dark before you fix it, things like that. So that's really challenging. Obviously, storms and bad weather is really challenging. And then our boat was, our sails were ripping. The boat actually had leaks, so there was water coming in. Like I said, the engine was a constant problem. The only way to fix the refrigerator was if my partner Jim half lifted me into a cupboard, and then I would have to lean down in this downward dog pose as he held my waist up so I could reconnect these wires, just things like that were just huge challenges and not what you expect. I don't think I went into it completely dreaming, with the complete dream of sailing into the sunset, but I didn't expect to be repairing the boat as much as we were. And I do think that was one of the biggest challenges, and definitely a fear I had to work through, because, when things aren't working, you don't necessarily feel super safe in your home because it's a floating home in dangerous conditions. And then things aren't working properly, Yeah.
Do you get upset when people over romanticize what you're doing?
Yeah, I do get frustrated sometimes. I get frustrated over a few things. One thing that gets to me a lot is because there are a lot of sailing channels that do have nicer boats or more income, or aren't obviously doing veterinary work. People, I think our life is that, they're seeing these channels where people are in bikinis and they're enjoying snorkeling and they're swimming in the ocean and they're doing all this stuff. And I think they're kind of like, well, why should I give you money to do that? And I was like, well, you're not giving me money to do that. You're giving me money to help these animals, because, you know, we get to snorkel sometimes and enjoy living on a boat, just like you would living in a house where you might go for a hike or, you know, something on the weekend. But, you know, the vast majority of time on the boat is spent visiting small towns, getting supplies, you know,
fixing the boat,
making connections, fixing the boat. Yeah, exactly. You know, it's a full-time job. I think that's the biggest thing that gets me, is when people act like it's a holiday. You know, even my parents for quite a few years in the early stages were kind of like, why would you give up your career to do this? And I was like, I haven't given up my career. I'm a veterinarian. I'm just not, you know, working. And it took a while for them to understand what we were doing. And they actually came on the boat eventually, about 2 years in. And then I think they were like, oh, this is a ton of work. We did not realize, you know.
And I mean, and it's funny because you worked in these high-end places,
Mm-hmm.
and you needed this to find what you're kind of looking for. What is the feeling you have now as you're on this amazing mission? I don't even call it an adventure. It's a mission. What's the feeling you have now compared to what you had when you were working at the gold standard practice?
Yeah, I think it's that sense of purpose and fulfillment. I think I get a very strong sense of purpose because, like I was saying, if I wasn't there, nobody would be there. And so obviously you know, at a normal veterinary clinic, you might be working with 8 other veterinarians. Your role is still very important. And I definitely don't want to take away from what veterinarians do, because it is so important. But for me personally, when you are then also experiencing symptoms of imposter syndrome or burnout or compassion fatigue, it's more difficult to feel like you're important or that you're making a difference as an individual. So I think for me doing this work, it's just so much more obvious that I'm making a difference as an individual, because I'm the only one there. And I also think the sense of fulfillment that comes with that is really important to me. The biggest challenge for me working in clinics and even for charities with Animals Asia and things was the inability to do things sometimes that I wanted to do, that I thought the animal needed, whether it was from cost constraints or restrictions with, you know, laws or policies or different things like that. And in the position I'm in now, you know, working for myself and in the places we're in, I can't always offer gold standard treatment, but I can offer the very best treatment that I have, and I can go as far with that treatment as I want to. You know, I'm not making the call at any point based on like these outside restrictions. When I make the call that no more treatment can be done, it's because there is no more treatment available, kind of thing, which I think gives you a much better sense of fulfillment, and you're not getting that moral injury that we sometimes get, I think, in the clinic.
Oh, we'll get into moral injury. Don't worry.
We'll
go there in a second. Do you believe that the gold standard, I mean, obviously the gold standard is there to protect patients.
Yes, of course.
But do you think it destroys veterinarians?
I think it can. You know, so as an example, I do locum sometimes. And so it's obviously a huge juxtaposition for me going from working in like a town where all I have is a stethoscope and my medicine. Like I literally carry a toolbox around and that's all I have. So I'm diagnosing, you know, displaced hips, fractures, like glaucoma, more or less through physical exam. And you do get quite good at it, you know, if that's all you have at your disposal. And then I kind of go back to these clinics and I have x-rays, I have ultrasound, I have blood machines. And so, for example, the last time I was locuming, we had a 19-year-old woman bring in her dog who was 6 months old, or maybe 8 months old, and he had vomited once. And the clinic protocol is that you offer x-rays and blood tests because, you know, the dog could have an obstruction, it could have kidney failure, there could be these things. But could also be that it's an 8-month. Right. It could also be a dog that ate some crap on the side of the road and is vomited once and will be fine tomorrow, you know. So I'm kind of talking through the gold standard because we have to legally offer it. We have to tell them. And this poor young woman, she's 19 and she's like in tears. She's worried about her dog. And she's kind of agreeing for me to do like $800 worth of diagnostics. And I was like, oh God, like, I don't feel good about this. Like, I can't ethically take this woman's $800 and x-ray her dog after one vomit. And the dog was there, you know, he didn't look that sick. He was wagging his tail. He didn't have any other symptoms of no fever. He didn't have abdominal pain, that kind of thing. And I kind of was like, what if he just stays here with me for a few hours and we see how he goes, and then I'll take the x-rays, that kind of thing. We found a little bit of a pathway, and he was like running around the cage trying to chew his way out 4 hours later. And I was like, I think this dog is completely fine. And he went home and he was fine. And like I said, it's not to say that he couldn't have had an obstruction, but I just did not feel right, doing all these diagnostics that I really did not believe that dog needed in that moment. And it's not to say that perhaps later in the day, he could have vomited again and then we would have done them and things like that. But I do sometimes think the gold standard, it's a lot of intervention really quickly. And I do understand why it exists and why we offer it. But I think it can put a lot of pressure on owners and make them feel really guilty when they can't do it. And it's not always, I think, necessarily necessary a lot of the time.
Well, so when you're in a village and you find an animal that you think has a obstruction, what are your options?
So I thankfully have not actually had that scenario before.
Okay.
But I probably would look at monitoring for 24 hours and try to do some kind of basic supportive care. And if I really thought there was an obstruction, I would just go into surgery, because it would be the only option available to me.
And you have the instruments. I'm not talking about anesthetic monitors and pulse ox, but do you use injectable anesthesia?
Yeah, we use total injectable anesthesia. And I have done a few larger operations, through that when it's been necessary, like eye removals and amputations and things, because we don't have any other options. And most veterinary clinics, even in the towns in Mexico, like even if you can get the patient to a small town where there are vet clinics, most veterinary clinics in Mexico don't actually have inhalant anesthetic anyway. So that's kind of, even if we were half an hour from a town and maybe that was a possibility, for the most part, everybody's using total injectable. And I carry pain relief. I have like spay kits, basically. So I've got a bunch of spay kits, so I can combine all of those to do just about anything that we need to do. So yeah, that would probably be my approach, would be to monitor for as long as it was safe to monitor, in case, we don't want to cut if we didn't have to, with some medical interventions. But if I really thought there was an obstruction, I would look at doing surgery. Yeah.
Do you think part of your problem you had is that you were trained in vet school to practice a certain way, but you constantly found yourself within the constraints of clients and what they would allow?
Yeah, definitely. I think that was really difficult. And the first clinic I worked in, the boss also had not really brushed up on modern medicine. So, for example, he was gassing down Rottweilers, did not use injectable anesthetic really at all, was pretty kind of funny with fluid therapy, was really weird, often gave like meloxicam and dexamethasone and steroids like all at the same time, like different things like that. So that was also challenging, because, I'd been inheriting these cases that perhaps weren't receiving the treatment I would have done. And then, then you'd have to continue treatment or change it. And that was always, I found, really challenging, because what we were taught at vet school was very different from what the older vets were doing in the clinic I went into as a new graduate. Yeah.
The cowboy medicine that they were practicing?
Yes. We had a joke that like sometimes on the chart on the cage, it would just say Dex Lap, and that meant dexamethasone long-acting penicillin. And so like that would be all you got. You'd inherit this case, you'd get the chart, it would say Dex Lap, and you'd be like, all right, well, let's see what happens. Let's see where we're going with this one.
So how much do you think this losing the sense of why you're doing what you want to do has to deal with burnout more than the caseload?
I think it's a huge contribution. And obviously, in my first job, like I said, I was working like 50, 60 plus hour weeks. And so, of course, you're going to get burnt out, no matter, even in a clinic where perhaps I was feeling more fulfilled at some point. You're only human, and you can't, like nobody can work a 60-hour work week indefinitely without eventually starting to experience some symptoms of physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion. But for me, in my second clinic role, for example, I did work more reasonable hours. You know, we were still doing long hours as vets, but it was definitely much more reasonable. But I still was definitely struggling, and I do think it was that constant moral injury, questioning, kind of questioning my purpose. And I also found it really difficult at that clinic. There was a little bit of a toxic culture of heroism, superhero kind of thing going on, where, you know, you'd write like a 3-paragraph summary as your for your write up, and then it'd be like, oh well, like this vet writes like a 3-page one, why aren't you doing that? And it's like, because when do I have time? You know, I don't have time to do that. Or, you know, you'd list 6 differentials and it'd be like, oh, we have to list 20 differentials for every patient, you know, like all these little rules that just add to your day that I don't think are 100% necessary most of the time. And then even, you know, like, for example, we would get like cost compared, as in, this person has brought in this much money this month, you have brought in this much money this month, therefore you're not doing the same level of work or contributing as much to the clinic. And it's like, well, that doesn't necessarily mean I've not contributed the same amount if that person's done more surgery than me, or, you know, different caseload. Like, I saw a lot of the exotic pets, and so they tend to be charged out a bit differently. Things like that just really, you start questioning yourself then too, right? Because if your boss is questioning your worth, then you're questioning your worth, and then there's no you know, you're not getting validation outside, you're not getting validation inside, and, you know, you can start to really question yourself and whether you are a good vet and whether you should be doing this and things like that. And, you know, when I was getting tired after a 10-hour day, and then, you know, one of my colleagues was, oh, I'm going to stay behind for another 3 hours, and I'd be like, I got to go home, like I'm tired. And then you start to wonder whether, you know, is there something wrong with me that I can't keep up with everybody, you know, that kind of feeling. And it's like, no, that like, we all just need to learn to like take a breath and slow down and not expect quite so much from everybody, you know?
Yeah, well, everyone has different resilience. I mean,
Yeah,
and that's one
exactly.
of the things I'm studying right now. But you keep going back to it, so we're going to go into it. Let's talk about moral injury, because that's the latest rabbit hole I'm going down. You know, moral injury basically is when you as a veterinarian took an oath to do certain things and practice a certain way, and there are constraints for whatever reason, and you can't practice the way that is ethically and morally correct to you. Do you agree with that definition?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so, you know, and obviously one of the biggest things, at least here in the States, you know, is the power struggle of now 40% of the clinics being corporately owned, and they're expecting you to hit a certain average client transaction and see so many cases in a day. And it leads to, you know, what basically turning veterinarians, in my opinion, into a used car salesman, and, you know, not enough time spent with clients, and patients aren't getting the care they need.
Yeah.
First question I really have for you is, do you believe, because it's, you know, moral injury again comes to power, do you believe clients have the power?
No, I don't necessarily think they do. I think it's like I'm a big believer in kind of the systemic issues that lead to it. You know, like a client, in my opinion, doesn't, like, you know, if their puppy's been hit by a car, they don't want to euthanize their puppy. They don't want the puppy to have been hit by a car. Like, they didn't choose any of that. And I think they generally do feel powerless in those situations. You know, and I'm sure if they had $1 million in the bank, they would almost definitely pay for the puppy to get the treatment it needed. But if they don't, which could be from so many different circumstances that are beyond their control in many situations, you know, we can't treat it for free. They can't pay for the treatment. You're in this kind of standoff. And it's the puppy that suffers. I mean, well, everyone suffers. The puppy suffers. The vet doesn't feel good about the situation, and the client suffers because they lose their pet. It's kind of like a lose for everybody.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously the puppy unfortunately loses. The
Yes.
veterinarians get moral injury, and that starts eating away at them. And then the clients tend to go home and write all over the internet that you have no compassion.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a perfect triad. I believe that we're not looking at it enough in veterinary medicine. I think everything has just been thrown into this bucket called burnout, and
Yes.
moral injury are two separate things. I do believe moral injury can lead to burnout. I also believe moral injury can lead to the suicide ideation more than burnout as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they found it. I've spoken to Dr. Wendy Dean, who discovered moral injury in the medical profession a few times, and she was talking about how like the drone pilots that are in Colorado would go home with moral injury, knowing that they did the wrong thing, and they were nowhere near. They were probably flying drones in the Middle East somewhere. Is there a common, if you wanted to keep it really simple, what is a common example of moral injury what can cause moral injury in a veterinarian?
Mm-hmm. I think cost constraints are probably the biggest one, in that you know that you could give the animal life-saving treatment, but you are unable to because of cost constraints. I think, though, too, for some veterinarians working in rural practices, like where I was in Bundaberg, which is about 8 hours from the nearest referral center. And we were also just limited in terms of like the resources we had in the clinic. It was 15 years ago. We had only very basic blood testing, for example, and things like that. So sometimes it wasn't even that the owner couldn't afford it. They had everything, but we didn't have the facilities. We didn't have a ventilator, for example, different things like that. But we would see a lot of snake bites, and they would get paralyzed and sometimes need ventilation. And you would sit there and ventilate for 12 hours, and it was really hard work. And, sometimes we wouldn't be able to do that if we had a few cases in. There's only so many of us, things like that. And I think the other thing sometimes that we don't always think about with moral injury is the opposite. As you were saying, particularly in corporate clinics now, where you might be following a checklist, you can also get moral injury from recommending things that you do not believe the animal needs, which I think is something that might go under-recognized, where you don't feel ethically right doing all these additional treatments, or upselling certain things and things like that, which I think is another area that perhaps goes a little bit under-recognized. Yeah.
Were there any good vet decisions you made that still made you feel bad when you were in practice?
Yes, I think so, particularly if the patient outcome wasn't good. You can't always, I think, particularly as a new graduate, I had very little support and mentorship. So I was making the best decisions I could, but I did not have a senior veterinarian approving the decisions or going over my cases or anything. And so I definitely questioned so many of my cases, where even though I did what, the textbook, I really tried to do everything by the book and do the best treatments that were available and that I could do. If the patient outcome didn't turn out well, then I would question everything. Like I, for example, one time had a 11-year-old Staffordshire Terrier come in that had eaten like a pile of stones, like 20 rocks or something. And so I had to take it to surgery to remove them from its stomach. And I did the surgery, closed up, took an x-ray, and then there was still like I'd taken like 20 stones out, and then I took the x-ray, and there's still all these stones in there. So I opened it back up, and I was by myself with a nurse. It was 11 p.m. at night. In hindsight, I probably made some wrong decisions and maybe should have waited till the next day and things. But in the moment, I was doing what I thought was the best thing, and the patient died on the table. Basically, was how it ended. And it was super tough. And I don't think I necessarily did anything wrong. But had I perhaps had a second vet in surgery to help me double check and help me elevate things and help me really, having a second pair of hands sometimes can be the difference. If perhaps I'd had a little more experience, that could have made a difference. Different things like that. If I had better facilities where maybe I didn't have to move the patient like halfway across the hospital to the x-ray table and then all the way back again to open it back up, all of these different things may have made the difference. So I think, that I was for sure experiencing moral injury from that, even though the owners had done the right thing, I'd done the right thing, and we'd all tried. But yeah, it's still really hard to lose a patient, I think.
We all have those cases, right? We have all those cases that just hit you deep. And you take them home with you. Did you ever take cases home with you that because you felt they were unjust?
What do you mean?
Like
what kind of?
Like you just felt that you did it a certain way because you had to.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think, definitely. Like for example, we had a case once where it was a puppy, and I kind of inherited the case, and it was a painful puppy. It'd been treated with meloxicam, and then it ended up having the immune mediated kind of joint disease, and needed to go on steroids. And I wanted to start steroids that day, but the dog had been on meloxicam for 3 days, and the clinic I was at did not allow you to give. They had I think a 72-hour washout rule, which I know technically is the thing, but this puppy was like in such extreme pain. It was screaming and crying. And I was just like, at some point, can we not give this dog like a meprazole and start the steroids, for God's sake? Like, because the poor thing was he was just in so much pain, and he needed the immune modulation stuff. Anyway, and the different things like that, definitely, when you're kind of having to follow perhaps rules that, of course, those rules exist to protect patients in many situations, but sometimes the fear, like the hospital's so fearful of getting sued that they follow these rules to the absolute textbook, when I don't actually think it was what the right decision was for that puppy in that moment. And then you sit at home feeling guilty about that. Yeah.
So do you believe that when you were having your issues, if you look back on it now and you've had time to reflect, obviously, as you're sailing and drinking your margaritas draped in puppies and kittens, do you look back and say, maybe this was more moral injury than it was burnout?
Definitely.
Or do you think it was both? Or do you think it was both?
I mean, it was both, because I was working really long hours, so it was definitely like, and I was stressed. I was stressed, and so I do think it was both. But I think the moral injury, I'm a chronic empath. I'm a bit of a people pleaser. I absorb other people's emotions very well as well. So I think for me, another really big problem was kind of that secondary emotional trauma. I'm the vet that cries in euthanasias. I really try not to, but I really struggle to put that wall up. I'm the vet that sits at home thinking about patients that from weeks ago, that wondering whether I did things right and things like that, which I think so many of us are. Where most veterinarians are big empaths. And so, I think for me, it was the combo. But I do think that kind of secondary emotional trauma from taking, when clients were upset, when other vets are upset, when, that kind of thing, I really took that on and kind of internalized it. And the moral injury was definitely a problem for me. I really still to this day struggle with it. And that's why I think I like working for myself, because I don't experience it at the same level, because I'm always making the choice that feels good to me. And it doesn't mean I don't ever make the wrong choice, or that, I have only good patient outcomes, but I at least know that it was the decision that I felt was right at the time. And, we're all human, right? You can only make the decision that is good right at the moment. It's all very easy with hindsight to look back and be like, I could have done this, I could have done that,
Did you ever lose your empathy though? Did you? Or did you always have it no matter what you were going through? Because you hear a lot of times, especially when it comes to moral injury, you lose your empathy, but you never thought you did?
I think I got so exhausted that I perhaps wasn't feeling my emotions in a very regulated way. But I think for me, if anything, I kind of got more emotional and almost took it on more and more and more. It was like my barriers and my ability to like keep that, keep some of other people's emotions or that, guilt and those feelings at bay got like completely lost, where it was just like I was internalizing all those feelings. So I think for me, I never really lost my empathy. I think it was almost that it became too much, where like every client that couldn't afford treatment, every pet that passed away, it just felt like such a huge burden,
Do you think the best barrier to prevent moral injury is to go work for yourself then? Because that's what I think, right?
Yeah,
because you get rid of the
it
power
probably
piece.
is. Yeah. And perhaps having like some more autonomy in the clinic would be a way around that, so that people can work in a clinic while still not experiencing moral injury. I often think about things like at the clinic I was at, because I was working at the wildlife clinic and we were getting donations. I was like, couldn't we have something like that at this clinic where at the very least, like once a month, every vet can pick one case that they treat for free, or like something like this to give us like some sense that we're doing good, and we've got clients who could help fund the treatment of other pets. Can we not set something up to like try to help these other patients of ours? But I also understand it's a business and it's hard, but I feel like there's got to be some middle ground where the business is still making profit, but vets, not at the expense of vets and, like you said, to patient safety and patient health, and also not at the expense of our clients. I know a lot of us have problems with our clients, and I know clients can be difficult and sometimes they badmouth us and there's all these things, but I'm very much a believer that people in those situations are operating from a place of hurt and a place of potentially guilt if they couldn't afford the best care for their pet, or they're questioning why things have happened this way, and it's just we're the easiest person to blame. And so even in that situation, I guess I can still feel the empathy for them, where I can see like, yeah, they like in their mind they brought the animal to the vet, right, and then things went wrong, and so perhaps it could help with those situations too.
Well, I mean, you're already battling. I'm going to ask you a personal question. Did you go seek therapy at all?
Yes, I have been to therapy.
Okay. Okay. And what did they say to you when you said, I'm buying a boat and I'm leaving town?
Well, I didn't get therapy until I lived on the boat, actually, which is ironic because I probably needed it before then. But I didn't have time. One, like, when was I going to go see a therapist working like a 60-hour work week? Like, it was so hard to fit that into my life. And I just didn't, like, once I was on the boat and I had the time to reflect, that was almost when like I realized that I'd been operating in this mode, this kind of like almost like a survival, like where you're kind of just on edge and there's all these feelings and you're just not processing them and you're just squishing it down and kind of keep on going. And that was really when I kind of started to be like, hold on, like maybe I don't need to feel some of these feelings I'm feeling, and maybe there's more to it. And I also I have a condition called PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoria disorder. And so I had been on, basically I had symptoms as a teenager and a young adult, but I didn't know what it was. And then I went on a birth control product that stopped me getting symptoms. And then I went off of it when I was about 28 and which was roughly when I moved on the boat and started getting symptoms again. And I have a family member who has bipolar disorder. And at first I thought I was getting symptoms of that because I was basically I'd be fine. And then all of a sudden I just wouldn't be fine. And then like a week later I'd be fine. And I was like, what the heck is going on? And so and then eventually it was actually my current partner, Jim, he has a calendar and he keeps everything on the calendar, and was also just mapping my cycle on there because he writes everything on his calendar. And we all of a sudden were kind of like, oh, hold on a second. Like, as soon as I get my period, I am sane again. And then it lasts for about 2 weeks. And then I go feel like I'm going crazy. And then it goes away again. Like, hold on a second, this must be something. But at that time, it was going very underdiagnosed. There was very little information on it. And I was very lucky to find a therapist who specialized in it. And that was when I started therapy, basically, was because of that condition kind of like forced me into it, because it was that, or like I was in the middle of Mexico. Like we were in this very rural town of Mexico. The boat was hauled out of the water. We thought we were doing a 3-month repair. It had been a year, and the boat was nowhere near going back in the water. Everything was pulled apart.
You're on Mexican time. You're on Mexican time.
Yep. It was during the pandemic, so getting to a doctor was difficult. And we were in a rural town of Mexico, so there was no specialist, the local doctor cost 40 pesos, which is like, for people who aren't down there, it's like $2. It was very basic clinic. And we were also doing veterinary projects that whole time, massive spay and neuter events in a town that had never had these types of things before. So we were seeing very sick and injured dogs, strays, this kind of thing. So there was just a lot going on. And I finally went to therapy, and it was life-changing. And I had I went to a she specializes in hypnotherapy as well, the therapist I saw. And for me, I had done talk therapy before. I'm divorced, and I did some talk therapy during that process and didn't find it that helpful for me. I'm already an overthinker, so I feel like I don't necessarily need to keep keep overthinking it by talking about it more. So yeah, and it was funny though. But hypnotherapy was like completely life changing for me. She doesn't do hypnotherapy as in like you're going under. It's it's almost like a guided meditation that goes for quite a prolonged period of time, where she helps you with like subconscious releases and things. And she does somatic therapy as well as talking to you. It's a real mix of stuff. But I kind of have her in my back pocket at any time I start to feel that things are getting a little weird. I just do a session and then I'm good again for months usually. So I would say that I'm cured of PMDD, but I don't know if you ever truly are. But I definitely don't get symptoms anymore and haven't for years. So I'm a big advocate of seeking help if you feel you need it. And I just didn't even know I needed it, I think, in those early stages when I was younger. And none of my family has ever gone to therapy. None of my friends have ever gone to therapy. In Australia in particular, it's really not like, it's not
Accepted.
Popular. People, yeah. And like you only go if you're like crazy, you know, like that's the kind of mindset that you only go if you're like really, really mentally unwell. And it's like, well, like you got to go before then so that doesn't happen, you know, like you don't wait until that very last moment when you're about to break or until you've already broken, which is, I think, kind of the mentality. So,
well, Crocodile Dundee used to do it. He used to go for walkabout, right? And come back like 4 months later. That's how they did it. You know, one last question about just the mental health thing, because you're out in a boat, and I know when you're out in a boat, the loneliness can get there. Even if you do have someone with you, you don't have that social connection.
Yeah.
Do you think that exponentiated any of your issues, or do you think no matter what, it was going to be that bad?
I think that it was probably worse because of it. So we were really isolated. And I think it's so, like, my partner is so amazing. He films all the work we do. He edits all the videos. He is my vet assistant. He plays, he's the mechanic. He plays so many roles on the boat, which is so amazing, and in our lives. And he's extremely supportive. Like I said, he helped me with my diagnosis because he was helping me track my cycle. You know, he's super supportive man. But the reality is your partner can't be everything, right? It's, even if they try to be, even if you want them to be, you still need friends, you still need other people to talk to, and it's not their role to be everything, right? So I do think that was something, because it was during the pandemic as well. We couldn't leave. We were basically in that town. If we left, we might not have been able to get back. So it was kind of, we're here with the boat, we're fixing it. It's just me and him. Not only was it isolating in that it was just me and him, there was very few other sailors there at the time. We had one friend who left after a few months, and otherwise people weren't really coming and going like they normally are. And my Spanish wasn't as good at that time. And so we were in a town with no other tourists. It's a very rural town. And so I didn't really have local friends either, because my Spanish just wasn't good enough to have I could have a very basic conversation, like a very, small talk conversation, but I couldn't get deep into conversation with anybody. But what's been really important for me is realizing the joys of technology, I guess, and knowing, like, calling my friends has become a bigger thing for me now. I don't just text. We do video calls, and we have, like, my friends and I will actually set aside, we almost make it like a meeting, like a Zoom meeting, where we're like, all right, Thursday at 2 p.m., we're both going to make a cup of tea or coffee or a drink or whatever, and we're going to sit down and we're going to, like, talk about our life for an hour, and that was definitely a really helpful thing. But it took me a while to figure out that was an option. For a long time, I just kind of felt isolated, and because we were stuck and nobody was coming to us and we weren't going to anybody else, it was definitely very isolating in the early stages. And I was also reluctant to tell people, because one, I didn't want people to worry, and then two, I felt a bit embarrassed. Like, I was like, I'm going crazy in the middle of Mexico with my sailboat. Like, I'm fitting this stereotype of being this low, this, like, sailor in the middle of nowhere that's, like, gone to the end of the road, Mexico, to, like, go slowly insane. And so it was definitely, I think that was kind of that stigma of not knowing if I could talk to people about it, and things was also quite isolating. But again, I've moved through that a lot, I think. Yeah.
So let's talk. Okay. So let's talk about what you're doing now.
Yes. Yeah.
How do you fund what you're doing right now?
So it's funded pretty much purely through YouTube and Patreon. So we make videos of the work we do, and they're on YouTube. And from that, we get kind of Patreon subscribers. So they basically give an amount each month, and that kind of keeps it going. So we get, it's around like $2,000 a month, which isn't, it's good. It keeps us going. But as you could imagine, like this last month, we treated 500 patients. So you can imagine how quickly, Mexico's a little cheaper in terms of medicines and things, but it's still, it doesn't go far. We do a lot with it. Yeah.
So you get 2,000 a month, and I mean, a boat, that could be one boat repair, right?
Yes.
Unless you do it yourself. Do you do any other kind of funding, like GoFundMe or any other bootstrapping, or what? I mean, what else have you been doing?
Yeah, definitely. So, like for example, our rigging had to be replaced last year. Our rig, which for people who aren't sailors is what holds all the sails up, was rusting to the point that if like our stays, which help hold the mast and sails up, were getting to the point that they were potentially going to snap. And if one snaps in high winds, it can lead to all of them snapping very quickly. And then your mast breaks and you're in a really bad position. It's very, very dangerous. So we had left it as long as we could, but it was getting to the point that it was getting like, okay, we can't keep sailing like this. And so we did a GoFundMe for that, and we're able to raise the money to replace the rigging. So because as you said, like replacing the rigging was like $15,000. So it's $2,000 a month, even over years, is just not going to give you the savings you need to be able to replace something like that. So, yeah, I always joke. I basically have taken a pay cut with every job I took. From my new graduate job was the highest amount of money I've ever been paid. So,
do you believe you're finding that mental clarity you need now, though? I mean, because that's
definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think the last probably 3 years have been like I've been so stable. Obviously everybody has their ups and downs, but I really have not experienced the same feelings that I used to feel before. I have noticed though, like when I'm back in the clinic, I definitely do not have the same emotional resilience as I think I maybe pretended to have, or at least I'm not good at putting the barriers up because I don't have to now. I with my patients and the people I work with in the communities I work with, the work I do doesn't tend to be as emotional. It's not quite as emotionally charged as it is in the clinics, and the people I work with love their pets and value them, but it's a slightly different way. I think they're much more used to experiencing loss in their lives. They're more used to the fact that animals do get sick. There's a bit more of an acceptance of those things, and so people do definitely get upset when their pets are sick here, but in Mexico. But it's not quite the same energy. Like I, for example, did a euthanasia while I was locuming in Australia. And it was a mum and two daughters, and the dad wasn't able to come because he was working away when the dog got sick. And it was brutal. The mum was on the floor crying with her 10 and 12-year-old daughter trying to like get her up off the ground. It was so emotionally like difficult, and I'm just not used to those scenes anymore. And so I'm not as good at putting the barriers up. And so that was something that I actually had to ask the clinic, like, I need to be out the back for like the next hour doing the hospital patients, because I like can't go into another consult because I was too emotionally charged. And thankfully the clinic I locum at, they're really amazing. They have very strong mental health kind of standards. They really want to look after the people who work there, so they're very understanding like that. But not all clinics are. So it's hard to go from that and then walk into another consult and you're kind of carrying this grief that has been shared in the room. It's very difficult.
Is there anything about this mission you hate?
Ironically, I am not somebody who really likes uncertainty or change, which is like, I know it sounds ridiculous because I live on a sailboat and never know.
Every day of your life right now.
I know. It's like pure chaos, and I never know what I'm doing in like a week, and the weather changes and then we have to change all our plans. And so it's been really good for me because it's, I've had to learn to be so flexible and adaptable. But it is actually something that's very challenging for me. And it is something I really struggle with. And like, I love traveling, but like, I don't really like the act of traveling, like I hate flying. I don't like being in airports. Like I get stressed, and so that's definitely like, if I could somehow magically just like teleport myself from place to place and predict the future, that would be really useful for me. But obviously that's not how things work. That's definitely something that's a challenge for me, is the unpredictability of it and letting go. Probably I would say part of the reason I never really thrived working in clinics and under other people is I do like to have an element of control over things. And so, I have very little control over the weather, and our clinic days never go as planned because, we're rocking up to like a beach palapa. I plan to do vaccines that day. The people who are booked in for surgery the next day just turn up because they heard I was there, and then I'm doing surgery instead, and the vaccines are back in the fridge. Like I've definitely had to learn to just let go of that control, which I think is really good for me, but it's definitely been challenging for sure, and one of the difficult parts. And if I could also just make it so that like the wind always blew between 5 and 15 knots from the right direction and the seas were smooth, that would also be perfect, because I do not like sailing in high wind and storms. I get a little bit scared. So that would be the other thing I'd love to change.
2 feet at 8 seconds. That'd be perfect.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. With like maybe 10 knots from behind, like, or the beam. Yeah. Yeah, that would be nice.
Is there anything you're dying to get off your chest?
Not really. I think one thing I always kind of like to say to people, like so many people say they couldn't do what I do. And I like to say to people, like, it's not that you can't, it's that you choose not to a lot of the time. And not to say, they might be making that choice for the right or wrong reasons. But I think so many people are very afraid to change the way their life is. And they come up with all these reasons. Oh, but I own a house here, so I can't sell the house because I just couldn't possibly sell the house. And it's like, but you can sell the house. There's nothing, you have reasons for not selling the house, but you are choosing those reasons over the reason to sell the house, and so that's definitely something I try to say to people. Like, if they do have this dream and it feels like they have all these things that make it impossible, sometimes you've really got to sit down and look at, is this impossible, or am I choosing not to make it possible? I think, because there is a difference. And like I said, sometimes it's that maybe like becoming a sailing vet isn't actually as big of a priority as you thought initially. But it's really important, I think, to sit down and look at those things that might be holding you back and kind of say, can I actually change these, even though I'm saying it's impossible? Because, I made a lot of sacrifices to do this, and still do make a lot of sacrifices to do it. Like I said, I obviously don't earn a lot of money, particularly I could earn a lot more money in a clinic than what I do doing this. I don't get to see my family as much as I would like to. I've delayed having children for quite a long time because we've been in a situation that's not been perfect for it. I don't have pets. I would love to have pets. There's all these things that that can be barriers, but also they're only barriers if you let them be barriers, I think,
How much longer are you going to do this?
I know everyone always asks me this, and they've been asking me for like 8 years, and I'm always like,
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, I don't want to be everyone else.
I didn't. I didn't.
What's going to have to happen for you to stop doing this?
I think if the boat sunk, or something terrible happened to the boat that was like made it very expensive to repair. If our ultimate goal is to make ourselves redundant, so our ultimate goal is to set up, in the places we visit, we try to set up local veterinarians or organizations to continue the work after we leave. And so if I could do that in Baja and everything was set, and we had, all of the towns we visit had a vet to visit them, and we kind of could set that up, perhaps I would consider it. But I think if ever we weren't on the boat, I would more or less be doing the same thing, but just without a boat, potentially land-based somewhere. I think it's my, I think I'll always be doing outreach in this way, at least for the foreseeable future. But, it's one of those things, like when I first went on the boat, I definitely did not think I would do it for 8 years, and it's been 8 years now. And so we'll see whether it's another 8 or whether it's 2, or who knows. It's so hard to say.
Okay, worst case scenario, boat sunk, everything's done.
Mhm.
Would you set up camp in the States, in Australia, Mexico? Where do you think your ideal place would be?
I
Costa
think
Rica is great, by the way.
I was going
Costa
to say
Rica.
Costa Rica would probably be my choice. I think we love to surf, and surfing's been such a great like meditative and mental health journey for me as well. I think if anyone's thinking about learning to surf, it's such a good thing to do. You should do it. And so I would probably want a tiny casita by a wave somewhere in Costa Rica, where I could maybe still do small animal. This is kind of the dream if ever I didn't have the boat. I would get a tiny casita by a wave in Costa Rica, and I would try to do some wildlife work for free, and then also do, spay and neuters and vaccines for the local pets, and kind of just be happy in my semi-retirement of doing that, I think.
Playa Hermosa. That they have a nice. They have that's not a bad place to be. But
yeah, it's beautiful.
Well, last question I asked all my guests is, what's one truth in veterinary medicine that the textbook did not teach you?
That the animals don't read the textbook. I always like that line. I think that's I always say that to new graduates.
5 times a day.
No, I always say that to the new graduates. I'm always like, the animals don't read the textbook, because so many of them are like, all the little diagnoses match the textbook, and then I'm like, yeah, that's not what the animal has. It has this, So.
Been there, done that. That's the fun part. No, that's always the fun.
Yeah, it for sure is. Yeah.
Dr. Sheddy, this has been amazing. What you're doing is absolutely incredible. If someone wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way? On your YouTube channel, LinkedIn? What's the best thing for him?
Yeah, all of the above is fine. I am on Instagram as Dr. Sheddy the Sailing Vet. I don't have, I deleted social media off my phone, so I don't check it as regularly as, if you message me, it might take me a day or two to get back to you, but I do check it regularly. And vettales.com, our website is vettales.com, and it has my email and a contact form on it, so people can also get a hold of me there. And yeah, then YouTube as well. We're kind of all over the place. YouTube, Facebook, all of the important ones.
Absolutely incredible. I hope you write a book one day. I hope you
you
have amazing pictures. I mean, I could just imagine. It would be a very niche gift, but I could imagine your book being given to almost every single veterinary student, family of veterinarians. Just because it's remarkable what you have done.
Thank you so much. It is a dream to eventually write one. I need to sit down and start writing some stuff down.
Well, next time you're in the middle of the Pacific, you might as well get pen and paper, because there isn't much to do.
Yeah, that's a good plan.
And to all the listeners, if you can't get a hold of her, you can always hit me up on my DMs. I can try to get a hold of her as well. Obviously, if you're interested, I'm pretty sure. Are you looking for help, volunteers?
Yeah, we have taken volunteers before. We've had vet students on board, which is really fun. The main thing is, if you want to volunteer with us, you have to be very prepared for a last minute trip, because it's very hard for me to tell you what we're going to be doing in advance, or even where I will be in advance, because we go with the weather, go with the projects kind of thing. But yes, we do take volunteers. So just sometimes it's a bit of a last minute organization.
Yeah. And as she said, if this is something you're interested in doing, or anything in life you're interested in doing, it's not that you can't do it. It's just that you're not putting enough effort into it to do it. And Dr. Sheddy, again, thank you for listening. To our listeners, thank you for listening. And we will catch you next time here on Irreplaceable Truths.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely.